arm's getting tired.
They have a mic on?
Yeah, they have a... Why? Oh, no, no, you don't need one.
Oh.
No.
Is that the mic?
No, yeah, they don't, you don't need one on that.
Just picked up. The mic comes from the camera, I guess.
Yeah, whatever. It's no, we don't need mics. We never need mics. We should be on. I don't know what's going on. Good afternoon. My name is Doug Holder. I'm here with the Dan Gewertz. I pronounced that right?
Gewertz.
Gewertz. I'm sorry. We'll get that right eventually. And I'm going to give you an introduction. I'd just like to say thanks for being here. I'd like to say that Dan Gewertz has made a living as a Boston-based freelance journalist for 28 years, writing largely about music, theater, and movies. From 1995 to 2005, he wrote a weekly Boston Herald column on folks and blues musics. Over the years, Gewertz.
Second syllable is
I'm bad with names. Gewertz has written for periodicals ranging from Harvard Magazine, Boston Globe Magazine, and New York Times to the Cambridge Chronicle and Tab. In the past 10 years, Daniel turned his attentions towards creative writing, namely personal essays, short memoir pieces, storytelling, and fiction. Recently, he completed his first novel, Ghost to Genius. He frequently performs his work on stage, and he has taught writing at Cambridge Center for Adult Education, Brookline Center for Adult Education, Lesley University, and Bay State Community College. Welcome.
Thanks, Doug.
As a journalist, you had a number of interesting experiences. You lunched with Glenn Close. You drank soda with Liberace. You've been sung to by Ray Charles. I'm interested in your experience with Richard Yates, the novelist. You were drunk under the table with him. Perhaps you can tell us a bit about that.
That was a very strange incident. I was going to do a Boston Herald magazine story back in the day when the Herald had a pretty decent-sized Sunday magazine. So this was the 80s.
Okay.
I'd say 85, relatively early in my Herald freelance career. And so I needed a few hours of interview for a good-sized story. And he was teaching at BU, and I believe he hadn't written his last novel yet. But he was drinking extremely heavily. And we went to the Crossroads, the bar that still exists. I think it's now an Irish bar. It might have been an Italian restaurant at that point. And he drank an enormous amount. I maybe drank half as much as he during the long afternoon. I got about 3 hours on tape, and after the first hour, he was just more slurry and more full of braggadocio, and I ended up being baffled about what to do with the interview because I didn't want to show him in a bad light. And I had tons of other writing I was doing at the time, so I never used it until a couple of years ago when it became a WBUR story with the Robin Young show. So I was able to actually unearth this audio on little cassettes that were moldering in my closet all those years and put it on the air.
Great.
Which was remarkable.
That's great. Like I said, some years ago I had written something on my blog, and you had put it on your Boston Herald column about seeing.
This was a Herald story that occurred right at the same time as that fairly long BUR piece.
Yeah, okay. Now, you've recently completed a novel, Ghost to Genius, which beyond the personal story of the narrator, Philip Levinson, but the themes, beyond that personal story, the themes of the novel are the criticism of popular culture, artistic greatness and success. I was going to ask you, does one exclusive of the other, artistic greatness and success?
Well, I would say the novel is an emotional journey. It isn't all a message novel.
Right.
But I think that, especially in music, to some degree movies, I think all the arts in America in the last 20 years have been demoted to the lowest common denominator, it always was true that intellectuals poo-pooed whatever was popular. The golden age of Hollywood, 1939, 1940, 41, was completely dismissed by New York intellectuals as sentimental garbage. But they really knew how to create art in those days. And now, well, with Hollywood, it's like they found out that people under 45 weren't going to the movies, so they made movies for people in their 20s and 30s. And then they found out people in their 30s wasn't going to the movies, so now they're making movies from 10 to 24. And it's, you know, it's just, I think it was Aristotle
It just
who
seems
said,
it just seems that the foreign films, I guess that's a cliche, but when I do look at the foreign films, even the titles seem more interesting.
interesting titles, especially Japanese and Korean films have fascinating titles.
Yeah, the French films I find also.
You could say the French are hardly in their greatest period, the new wave of the late 50s
Yeah, but
and
I'm
60s.
saying in comparison to...
But compared to, I think that the blockbuster has taken over completely, and the interesting mainstream movie that is normally the Oscar-nominated film is almost non-existent. They still exist. I mean, they have to have the Oscars every year. With music, which was what I mostly wrote about, I concentrated on folk, blues, jazz, rootsy Americana music. These were the genres that were not in the mainstream. And the Herald did some coverage of those musics.
Talking of the folk scene, I have to bring up that new movie that the Coen brothers brought out about that folk scene.
Yep.
Have you seen that yet?
It's not out yet.
Oh,
but,
okay. Sounds
but
fascinating.
it's supposed to be great.
Yeah.
And I know it's sort of very vaguely based on the life of Dave Van Ronk.
Okay, who was in the Greenwich Village. And you knew him well?
Well, chatted with him a few times.
Okay.
Knew him well is way overboard.
Yeah, okay. All right. But he was the precursor to Dylan and all that?
He slightly preceded Dylan. He was from Brooklyn, so he didn't make that Minnesota to New York trek. And his connection to Dylan was basically that he taught him a number of songs. And Dylan took his radical new interpretation of House of the Rising Sun and sang it with Van Ronk's, was really a reharmonization and somewhat new melody. So it wasn't just a slight change. And then he said, "Hey, Dave, I put your version on my first album. I hope that's okay." And Van Ronk said, "No, it isn't okay." And he said, "Well, too bad, it's out. It's out next month."
Did you get any money from him?
Then the Animals made the exact same interpretation from Dylan, and so after that, both of them never performed the song because they said, "Oh, you're doing the Animal version." So
yeah, interesting. And tell me, I mean, you know, newspapers. I mean, you were just basically the Herald just sort of downsized substantially, and you know, you no longer are associated with them, right?
Correct. Yeah, since 2011, I was doing drama criticism for that year.
So this is the state of journalism has greatly diminished, right? I mean,
as far as I can tell, the Herald is on a skeleton staff, and the Globe.
And the Globe is printing it, right? The Globe is printing it.
Physically,
yeah.
The days when newspapers covered local stuff and out-of-the-way things and looked for critics who liked, who loved the music and art and was looking for something different to write about, those are gone. Mostly now you're having to cover the biggest, most popular thing and figure out something interesting to say about it.
I think the Times, to a certain degree, still has that sort of coverage in the arts section.
Yeah, they do. Although they have the cheesiest front covers in Sunday Times.
Yeah. But the arts section usually
Lady
is pretty
Gaga has been written about more than than lots of serious artists.
Right.
I do think that my book takes this as an underpinning. The story of the book is a very talented, little-known, middle-aged singer-songwriter named Philip Levinson is making a bare living in the New England area with his songs. He has a sterling critical reputation, but he's been at it for a long time, and he's really getting demoralized. He's also a widower, and he's kind of a loner, and he gets the opportunity when he meets this high-powered entertainment lawyer in New York to secretly ghostwrite the next album of a superstar, legendary singer-songwriter who can't write anymore, playfully based on Bob Dylan. So it isn't a question of a ghostwriter writing for a celebrity who can't really write a memoir or something like that. It's literally a secret job. If he tells anyone about it, if it's even a rumor that it's ghostwritten, he loses all his money. Mm-hmm. And that's in the contract. And so he has to lead a very secretive life, artistically fluid, because he has to write the best stuff of his career for this album, and yet telling no one and becoming more neurotic in the process.
So you got movie rights for the shit, or what?
No, not quite yet. No, I have to say that
looking for a publisher.
I am looking for a publisher and an agent right now. Just began the agent search. I will say that it's also fun, and it has a happy ending, and he finds true love, and so it's not like a
now, being
grim
a Lunsman, did he have to be Jewish? I mean,
I had a feeling. Okay, Dylan hid his Jewishness,
right.
Changed his name,
became Christian from.
Well, that was another eccentric part of his career, but of his life. But I sort of was attracted to the idea of someone like myself who is faintly Jewish, who's 100% Jewish as far as blood, but not religious. My parents were both atheists, and someone who didn't change his name, but didn't have such a Jew. I didn't want a name like Barry Goldberg, or who actually was a great organist as far as I remember. But in any case, I wanted someone with a graceful sort of sounding name that was somewhat Jewish, and occasionally some Yiddish expressions are in the book, but he's not a religious man. So I wanted that comparison with Dylan a little bit. It's one of myriad themes that crop up.
Okay.
I also have a depiction of Cambridge and Somerville a little bit that is full of eccentric people and street corner incidents and
I got to read this now.
Lots of anecdotal material.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
So I could fit little funny or interesting or emotionally evocative scenes from my life into it.
Yeah, detail is very important. And that leads me to the next question about you teach memoir. And in fact, we're talking about the Cambridge poet Populist. Lo Galusho is in one of your classes.
Mm-hmm.
It's been on this show a number of times over the years. And I remember, I was going to ask you, isn't what makes a good memoir what really makes good fiction in terms of description, character development, realistic dialogue? What do you think?
Those are all good.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I sometimes tell people in classes that if they're beginning to write fiction, try to at least base it, if not on actual reality, on something similar that happened to you, so there's emotional resonance and some punch to it.
Should it be like, when I teach memoir, an introduction to creative writing, I say that you should go from point A to point B. In other words, you're in one state in the beginning, and then in the end, you
right.
wind up in a more enlightened state. Or
you were changed to some degree.
Do you agree with that or not?
I think there has to be a little bit of change, but a great story is a great story. Mm-hmm. I know some academics, Sven Berkertz at Boston University, who's written eloquently about the memoir, believes that you have a story that is, and then this happened, and then that happened, and then this other thing happened, and who cares? Mm-hmm. It's what it means to you, how your feelings about it have changed over the decades, what you brought to it in a philosophic, emotional way. And that's all true, but a great story is a terrific thing. I did a lot of storytelling for the Mass Mouth organization a couple of years ago, and
Tony Toledo, is he involved?
Yeah, he's one of them. He's a very vivacious presence, and they concentrate on stories that are just high storytelling, just very there has to be a chase scene, and the narrator gets incredibly excited, and there's a life and death moment, and then everyone's learned something and happy at the end.
But life isn't so easy. Life isn't, it's chaotic in the sense, so sometimes.
Yes, it's a lot more chaotic than storytelling might make it.
So, yeah. But I did speak to Malachi McCourt, who wrote,
mm-hmm.
He was at the Somerville Writers Festival, and I also was in a conference with him. And he told me that, don't get so and when you're writing a memoir, don't get so enmeshed with what the facts actually were. It's more about impressions. Would you agree with that or not agree with that?
I do a certain amount of research so that my facts are correct, although all of memoir is dependent on memory and really an investigation of memory. Why does this element of a story fascinate you and you remember in great detail when you've forgotten something else completely? Why does it mean something to you? What's going on there? But it's thank God for Wikipedia, because I've looked up a lot of historical, political, little details.
We tell the kids not to use Wikipedia because it's not a reliable source.
It's reliable enough.
Okay.
I don't want a person, or even with a memoir story, me, listening to a song that didn't come out for 2 more years when I'm talking about 1969. It'll make the reader say, hey, wait a minute, that fact is wrong. Why should I believe the rest of this?
Okay. Now, you have also done performance pieces with Judah LeBang, Michael Mack, 2 Somerville area residents. And
Randy Ross.
I'm sorry, we just had him on last week. Tell us about this. Randy was just in the theater district doing something, or I saw something on his Facebook page.
Yeah, he's developing a one-man show. I think he has 60 minutes right now.
He's going to be on 60 Minutes?
No, he has 60 minutes of material.
I see.
If he's on 60 Minutes, I'll tell you about it.
All right,
He really went from scratch. He wasn't even an actor at all before. I've had some acting background long ago, and I've done a lot of radio work. So when we did a 3-man show, Judah, Randy and me, called The Roving Raconteurs, and we were pretty much reading. Every once in a while, I've done a piece where I'm memorizing, like for the Mass Mouth storytelling thing. It's not my métier, memorization. I'd much rather read, like I'm going to do today.
Okay. And in fact, you will. So, does anyone have a website? Do you have a website where people can read about you, or any sort of centralized type of thing?
I'm not big on self-publicity, which is my own fault, but I think I have a blog site. Let's see. You can tell me if this sounds right. It's one of those major blogs.
Blogspot?
Yes. It's www.blogspot.daniel.gewertz.com.
No, it'll probably be Dan. Just look up Dan Gewertz on Google, and you'll find it.
You'll
Good
find
enough.
something.
But as an author, you should have a website.
As soon as I get an agent, I'll get a website.
Okay, all right. It might be easy to get an agent if you have a website.
I'm hoping the prose will sell itself.
Okay, all right. Well, we wish you the best of luck here on Poet to Poet. So you're going to read something for us.
Oh, by the way, I just noticed Elizabeth Swatos' show with you was being archived. That was my first in-person interview with the Herald 30 years ago.
30 years ago.
Having lunch with Elizabeth Swatos.
Yeah, she's an interesting character. Yeah, absolutely. She won an Obie Award, I believe, for Runaways and things like that.
Yeah. So this is a piece from Ghost to Genius, and you don't need much backstory. It is a backstory in itself. It's just a rumination on the main character's teenage years. And he's just done a couple of songs at this place I call, well, it's a coffee house in Harvard Square. I don't give it the same name as it really has. I headed outside and began the short walk to my Dana Street apartment, the early spring wind at my back. On Dunster, just a block from the center of Harvard Square, I was surprised to see an old drunk unconscious on the sidewalk, sprawled near the Starbucks entrance as if dozing in the sun. He looked familiar. Like a lot of hobos, he had a full, healthy head of white hair. Why do street drunks have more hair than their respectable peers?
Yeah, why?
I thought of my own transience on this planet and then began brooding again about my unprofitable life choices. Why was I still lying in the middle of such a peripheral musical road? People always tell me how brave I am to pursue my uncompromising career path in the light of all the safe, better-paying ways I could have gone. I accept their compliments with what appears to be humble grace. That's all I know how to do, I say. But to me, that line is bleak. I'm stuck on this music path because I'm not nervy enough to think of another. Is it an aged adolescent's vision of immortality? Was I still seeking the adoration of the crowd to find love, sex, and fortune? To God help me find my Pied Piper role as a poetic seer? Maybe I'm like a perpetual 12-year-old, the ambition to be a singer-songwriter just one step more sophisticated than the boyhood dream of becoming a fireman. The uniform is neat, the trucks are shiny, the siren is awesome. Thinking about my strange pre-song spell on stage at Lyrism Coffee House that night, I had to ask myself, did I truly care if people heard my new songs? Was the old dream played out? I stepped over the insentient body of the white-haired drunk lying across the brick sidewalk. His foul smell followed me down the block. And as I walked along Mount Auburn Street toward home, a persistent memory from adolescence visited me once again. The first time I ever sang one of my own songs on stage. But to understand this event, I must tell you of another, earlier incident in my life. A 9th grade episode, so awkward I rarely in memory torture myself with it. It is winter, 1974, and I am still 14. Over a period of several weeks, I had forced myself to telephone 3 girls from my junior high to ask them for dates. I was woefully ill-equipped for the task, pathologically shy with girls, and yet I was convinced that I had to try, even if it killed me. I had barely spoken to any girls all that year in school, and what did I know of flirting? My only guides from pop culture came from watching old 1940s Cary Grant movies on late-night TV and listening to 70s songs like Let's Get It On by Marvin Gaye. Neither cultural source seemed very helpful. I must have made an unusually awkward impression because all 3 of my classmates, in their turn, declined my invitations to see a Saturday night movie. One after the other said no. Something must have been very wrong with me, I remember thinking, but I did not have a clue what specifically it might be. I was apparently just a loser. That's as close to an answer I had at 14. I remember the last one, a slender, delicate, brown-haired girl named Mindy who reminded me of a ballet dancer. I had a crush on her. For 4 successive weeks, always on Tuesday evenings, I called her. By the time I successfully dialed, she had come to the phone. And she had come to the phone, I was typically in a moist, panic state. Each week I forced some school-related small talk for a few tense minutes of prologue, and then asked her to the movies. Each week she thanked me politely, then came up with a highly specific reason why she could not go on a date with me that Saturday. Her cousins were visiting from Schenectady. She and her family were staying at Grossinger's in the Catskills for the weekend. Her girlfriends had a big bowling night planned at Sterling Bowl in the Lake Success Shopping Center. For 4 weeks I heard Mindy's excuses and I thought admiringly, my, what a socially active, popular girl. What an exciting, busy life she leads. How enviable. It was only after the 4th painful phone call and her 4th weekly excuse that it suddenly hit me. Mindy was lying to me. She was making up excuses because she could not find it in herself to tell me the simple truth. She did not want to spend time with me. These fabrications must be, I reasoned, what people call little white lies. She was trying to be kind, to be polite, waiting patiently for me to get the hint. Were some of these excuses concocted in advance? She must have thought me retarded, in addition to being undate-worthy. I remember being as miserable about this revelation, so miserable that I did not talk to girls for several weeks. Not even small talk with the neighbor girls who lived on my block. If they asked me a question while waiting at the bus stop, I'd answer in as few syllables as possible and then turn away. I thought I was doing them a favor. I had cooties and I didn't want to spread them. 2 years later, in the late spring of my junior year of high school, I had just turned 17 and was still a virgin. In fact, I had not yet asked another girl on a date since the debacle of the Mindy phone calls. But that was the spring my entire high school social status changed. In May, I entered my name into the school's big annual talent show. I'd taken guitar lessons for 2 years at that point, and though I'd occasionally perform a pop song for my guy friends when they came over my house, I had never played or sang in public. Just a month before the talent show, I had written the first song I really liked, a song motivated by the death of my grandmother. I thought that might be a dorky idea, so I changed the identity of my grandma. I changed her into a girl my age. So in my song, I finally had a girlfriend, but a dead girlfriend. Many years later, I thought of the inception of that song as a portent. In adult life, I had a wife, but a dead wife. Since each act in the high school talent show got 8 minutes on stage, I decided to do a hit song along with my one original. It was 1976, and my cover song was Paul Simon's recent single, 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover, which was tough to memorize. Standing backstage, I worried if I was about to vomit. My stomach felt like it was full of scrambling mice. But somehow I made it on stage and started playing, and then something peculiar happened. My nerves disappeared. They just did. It was like they vaporized into the spotlit air. I knew I was on stage. I saw the microphone before me. I knew I was playing guitar and singing. In fact, I was hyper-conscious of every note. And yet, I felt even better than I did performing at home, alone, in front of my bedroom mirror. I was aware that there was an audience before me, but it was like I was inside that Paul Simon song, telling the world the story of how my heart felt. I remember looking out at the darkened high school auditorium, my 2 feet planted wide on the wooden stage, my hips thrust slightly forward, my head back, a smile sneaking onto my face between verses. And one calm thought came into my head. I am on stage, and I am home. I am finally home. By the time the song ended, I had nearly forgotten about the audience, but then they began applauding. Emboldened, I introduced my new original song. This is a song I wrote myself about someone I knew who is no longer with us. And then I sang. It was a pretty depressing, emotional song, and I worried it might bring everyone down. My eyes were closed through most of it, but right before I delivered the last verse, I opened them. I will always remember what I saw. Everyone before me, maybe 300 of my fellow students, were focused on me, hanging on each line. It was like I was telling a spellbinding tale, a ghost story around a campfire, and they could barely wait for the scary surprise ending. The song finished with a big sustained note, which thankfully I sang on pitch. And then the place went nuts. I looked out at the applauding audience, my head suddenly hazy and overloaded, the last chord of my guitar echoing in my memory. Then, for a long, weird moment, it was like I heard no sound, just saw the clapping hands. It felt as if I were caught inside one of those little glass snow globes, the applause falling down silently around me. And then the globe broke, and the noise jumped out, gigantic. It stormed, and I thought, holy crap, they loved my song, mine. They loved it more than Paul Simon's. From that point on, my high school career was transformed. I got the lead in the next year's school musical, Bye Bye Birdie. I became the singer in a garage